Father, be pleased to speak through your word and through my meagre words and gather us around your word for us today. Amen. I was reading a report, a State of the Nation report, 2023, came out late last year. State of the Nation report, and obviously this has the interest of governments, federal, community groups and so on. And in this report, and in the supporting letters to it, or the sort of address from the executive, called this a serious global health threat. Called it a critical issue of our time. What do you think the report was talking about? We've just come through a pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and now we're talking about a global health threat. What on earth are we talking about? It's loneliness. We are in a loneliness epidemic. And the data that was raised and in this State of the Nation report on social connection in Australia highlights this, and this is at the root of a lot of things. We're in a loneliness epidemic. You can go and look on the page. It was National Loneliness Week 2 weeks ago. And annually there'll be some sort of focus on this, but a whole lot of other things going on behind it as well. But just a few statistics, if that helps you understand the size of the issue that we're talking about, then 1 in 3 Australians at any time will be lonely. So right now, roughly 1 in 3 Australians will be lonely. What are we talking about? Loneliness, by the way. Loneliness described as that distressing feeling when we feel disconnected and we desire more social relationships. So, at any time, 1 in 3 Australians. 1 in 4 Australians are persistently lonely. That is, for the purposes of the study, that over a period of at least 8 weeks, they were persistently experiencing loneliness. 1 in 6 Australians experiences severe loneliness. These are enormous figures. Now, you might think, well, let's talk about who is the most lonely in our society. Well, probably if you were talking 20 or 30 years ago, maybe you may have been right if you thought they were elderly, but that is not true. Those 60 plus are some of the better off in terms of loneliness statistics. The loneliest in our country are 15 to 24-year-olds. 41% of young people are lonely, persistently. The other thing that I found interesting was that, and this would not be lost on you, in Whyalla, and that is that people who are experiencing financial hardship, of which some are very recently experiencing financial hardship, are 7 times more likely to be persistently lonely. So you get the idea, you get the size of the issue here, and not only that, the impacts of loneliness is incredible, because if you are lonely, persistently lonely, you are 2 times more likely to experience chronic disease. You are 5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, social anxiety. And it's also contributing to the radicalisation of our youth online. Not much more needs to be said about that, about where the recruiting is going on. But you could probably more simply summarise some of the impacts of loneliness by this well-known fact is, if you are persistently lonely, it's the same health effect as smoking a packet of cigarettes a day. That is, the impact on your health is loneliness. So it's a significant issue, and it is a critical issue of our time. And it affects everyone, or should I say anyone. So there is, apart from the youth being the dominant area of loneliness, the situation and the state of your life appears to have very little bearing on it. Such is the extent of loneliness in our country and in our world today. Is there any solutions? Well, have a look at Luke chapter 10. Have a look at Luke chapter 10. There is something about practical Christianity has something very important to say about this. In Luke chapter 10 and verse 25, we see in Jesus' life and ministry this Jewish lawyer comes along, expert in the law, and he stands up to test Jesus by asking him the question, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" In the Matthew passage, here another one is asking, "What's the greatest commandment, Jesus?" And sort of a bit of a test. And Jesus replies to him, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" And the man answers, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and live." Now, the man wanted to justify his actions, here it says. Obviously, there was a contradiction in his own life and in the way he was displaying his own life that was testing him, particularly around the love your neighbour as yourself. I gather from the rest of the passage. And so the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" So who? Which? What? So here you've got a man who is in his head. He's in his head. He's making excuses. He's making justifications. He's making explanations. Something that I have fallen into myself in the past. And at certain times when I'm facing something that is uncomfortable for me, I'll make excuses, reasons and explanations why I'm not doing that, which is not very helpful for the person I'm talking to or living with sometimes. So, who is my neighbour? Well, Jesus doesn't answer directly. He gives this parable. You may know it well, but let's just read it. Verse 30. Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man, in other versions it says a certain man, some think it is Jewish, some think he's not. It doesn't matter, just follow on. Was travelling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, a very dangerous road, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up and left him half dead beside the road. By chance a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed on by the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine, bandaged them, and when he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Now, here is the story. Who is my neighbour? What does this parable tell us in plain language? It's anybody you come across in the walk of life is your neighbour. Pretty confronting, isn't it? Because I know the sort of people I come across every day, and that's the challenge. How do I love my neighbour? Now, there is something about literal neighbours. You know, the people next door to you. Now, Hugh Mackay, who was a well-known Australian social researcher, greatly respected, was sending the alarm bells up a number of years ago, saying he was talking about this coming loneliness epidemic, and he's saying we're heading in the wrong direction, we're in trouble. And in his, I can't remember which book it was, he was writing about how loneliness is a real issue for Australians, and it's a growing issue, And one of the things he said is what's driving that, one of the things he believed was people don't know their neighbours. Literally don't know the people in their street. They don't know that person next door and that person next door. The fences have got bigger, the fences have got higher, right? People used to talk over the fences, not anymore. We can't even see you. Maybe that's different in Whaler. It's certainly in the suburbs, they're going up. So people don't know their neighbours. They don't know whether they could trust that person. They don't know whether they could call on them if they had a need. And you know what that does? That raises anxiety. That raises social anxiety because you don't know whether that's a trustful person, a kind person, or whatever who lives literally around you. And that raises the loneliness and the social anxiety. And so Hugh McKay was saying we have to get to know and love our neighbours and be trustworthy, kind neighbours. Well, I sort of thought, look, I live rurally. I live on the south of LA on the Skurray Peninsula, so my nearest neighbour is 1 kilometre away. There's 1 kilometre that way, kilometre that way. So, we enjoy that. We haven't got any next door neighbours, it's great. But my neighbours are like, I can see them over the valley. I can't even see them because they're on the other side of the bridge. And so my excuse was, because I still work in the southern suburbs, I'm a commuter, right? There's not too many commuters in Whaler, I suppose, but I drive an hour to work and an hour home. And so it takes a bit of time up in the day. And so my excuse for not getting to know my neighbours is, well, I haven't any time left in the day. Like I get home and what can you do, I am around on the weekend, but there's a lot of work to do on a property. I've got all the excuses in the world for not knowing my neighbours, okay? But I started thinking about this stuff over the last 2 or 3 years, and I thought, man, Peter, you are making excuses. You are making excuses for not loving your neighbour, or even getting to know your neighbours. So I decided to do so, and got to know, I had some sheep we need to produce, so I asked the neighbour across the road, can we just sheep on your property? Yeah, no worries. Got to know him, and around about that time, his wife had a severe stroke and aneurysm all at the same time. She was on death's door, in hospital for months. Anyway, got to know him a little bit more over sheep, and eventually she's back home. We've started to build a relationship, and I heard the word when we were sitting around having a coffee. I heard the word loneliness, because he's now her carer. He's a geologist, basically. They're both geologists, works from home, etc. But he's her carer now, and he's an outgoing sort of guy. He's a people person, but he's stuck on a rural property and is severely limited in his social contact. And I heard the word lonely. It's very unusual to hear it, because lonely people will not tell you they're lonely. In fact, loneliness is its own worst enemy, because loneliness, when you feel lonely, you don't feel like being with people, even though that's what you crave. But loneliness keeps you back from it. So you won't hear a person call out when they're lonely. You have to go approach them. So another neighbour across the valley thought they'd been there for the last 2 or 3 years. Don't know who they are or anything. We happened across, it was an email. An email came from the neighbour complaining about the road, about why isn't the council doing this, that and the other, etc., etc. And we thought, this is interesting. This person sounds like a little bit of a complaining neighbour. I don't know whether we really want to know this person or not. But anyway, we did. But oh my goodness, where was I? Where were we? He's a teacher, relief teacher. Teachers are doing it tough, I tell you. They had lost a son to murder 10 years ago, still suffering the grief and not finding people who can talk about it with them. And they literally use the word, we're lonely out here. I've let people down because they're my neighbours, and this is going on, and it's so easy. It was so easy just to spend time, listen, hear them, have some compassion, suffer with them a little. So, better get back here. But this is what it's about. It's about, do you know your neighbour? Do you know what's going on in their life? Do you? It's the solutions to the loneliness epidemic is you and me. Well, let's get back to the text, because Jesus says it. He says it this way. He gives this parable, which makes the point, it's anybody you come across with need is your neighbour. Then he says, where are we? He says, now, Jesus says, which, in verse 36, which of these three would you say was a neighbour to the man who was attacked by the bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus said, yep, now go and do the same. Very interesting, isn't it? You've probably seen it before. Maybe you're seeing it for the first time. The lawyer says, who's my neighbour? He's looking for a way out. He's looking for an excuse, an explanation, or something like that. Jesus tells the parable. He answers it with a story, but his question back is, what kind of neighbour are you? What kind of neighbour am I? Is the critical question. Not who is my neighbour, it's obvious. It's like, what kind of neighbour am I? And that's Jesus' call to this guy that's asking, each one that was listening to him at the time, what kind of neighbour are you? Are you a neighbour who sees, truly sees? If you talk with somebody who looks at you when they're talking, that's very powerful. Eye contact. Caring, who hears, listens, and is not thinking about what they want to answer back, but just sees and hears. I meet with a group of guys on a monthly basis on a Thursday night. We go out for a meal at a pub, and it's just like sit around, chat, and talk about life. And it's great. The group's gradually warmed up. It's only the third time we've met, but like the power in a conversation when one guy has the floor, others are listening, seeing, hearing, and valuing that person. So, that's the sort of neighbour that we need to be. One who sees, hears, values, and has, what's that word we saw in there? The Samaritan had compassion on the man. What does compassion mean? It literally means to suffer with. To suffer with. That means something goes on in here when you hear their story. And you also, like the Samaritan, you may do something practical. But whatever it is, there's a sense of suffering with. You are not alone in your suffering. You are not alone in your loneliness. We are a community, and we're here for each other. So, is there an answer to this loneliness epidemic? Like I said before, yes, there is. And it's as simple as being kind neighbours, being good neighbours. For example, normalising conversations about loneliness, listening with your eyes and ears, being trustworthy, spending quality time. A simple one you might do because you might have a lonely person in your family. Try digital-free dining. Put your phones away from the table. Try some digital-free dining. See what happens. When we have time, when my wife particularly has time with one of our granddaughters regularly, just on looking after her for 2 or 3 hours after school, then she gets her cooking with her. And they just got a peeling veggies and all that sort of stuff, and it's just like anything to get away from digital distraction and hands-on, interactive, socially meaningful action and talk together. It's quite incredible what that does. We're talking about meaningful social connection. This is one of the solutions that's in the report, actually, is that the solution is meaningful social connection, which is that, and everything I said is about building. Have you ever heard the word social capital? That's the solution. We have to build social capital. Kindness, meaningful social connection, quality time, and creating safe places for people to interact and to connect. Churches can and should be safe places for people to connect. Schools and communities and church communities wrapping around school communities, creating safe places, say in a breakfast club. You know that breakfast clubs meet a physical hunger need, but that's most of the time it's actually meeting the need for meaningful social connection is what happens in breakfast clubs. And youth groups or wherever, craft groups, just like meaningful connection happening in safe social places is the answer. Knowing your neighbour, seeing, hearing them, is the simple solutions to the epidemic that we are in right now. It's so simple, isn't it? I don't know how we as churches forget or miss the point that we actually know this stuff. It's just, will we go and do likewise, as Jesus said. So, I'll finish with a story. Last night we were, the four of us from region, from SMG here, and we're just staying in a vacation park. Come back from dinner, and there's a guy sitting on the porch of the cabin across the laneway there, and he's pretty loud. He's had a few drinks by now, but he sounds like a nice little guy. And we pull up, and he says, "Hey, g'day, who are you? Where you?" Because we're both driving the same cars, right? He said, "Oh, we're from SMG Schools Ministry Group. We support pastoral care workers in schools." And he says, "Oh," and then he saw one of the guys. He said, "Is that you, Phil?" Because Phil's one of the regional managers. And so it turns out this guy is an ex-principal from Lake Wangaree on the Eyre Peninsula, and he was pretty under the weather, but his tongue was loose, and boy, did you see the passion in his heart come out. The passion for teaching and the difference he made in Aboriginal young people's lives and others. But of course, he didn't do things the right way according to the department, and he was pretty radical in his approaches. And in the end, like, I'm over it, I'm out of here, nobody's listening, etc., etc. But he spoke so highly of Phil, who's been around on the Eyre Peninsula serving schools and trying to get things moving there. But he spoke even more highly of the pastoral care workers, the school chaplains that he had in his school. And there's a description that he used, and he said, very lucid at this point, he said, "Tracy was like a wind of love through our school." And this guy himself was a passionate, make a difference person. Obviously very discouraged at this point, but he said, "Tracy was like a wind of love that came through our school." And that's what we're to be. And I thought, wow, what a powerful description that you and I need to be in our communities, in our schools. A wind of love. Does that sound like something to you? A wind of love through our community. That's what we're called to be. That's who we are. That's who resides in us. We'll let it blow, huh? Father, be pleased to change us from the inside out, that we might be the kind of neighbours that you empower us to be.